The 22nd of June, 1941. Under the code name Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union, its former partner in the war against Poland. Within weeks, German forces overrun vast territories in the east, including Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the three Baltic states annexed by Stalin's Soviet Union the previous year. The German occupation transforms life across the region. Jews are stripped of their rights and property and forced into ghettos. Civilians are deported for forced labor, Soviet prisoners of war are held in appalling conditions, and entire communities are subjected to persecution and collective punishment. Behind these policies of repression stand men who, for years, exercise enormous power over the populations under their control. Among them is Friedrich Jeckeln, one of Heinrich Himmler's most powerful SS commanders, a man held responsible for the deaths of more than 100,000 people. In January 1946, he and 7 other senior figures of the German occupation will be brought before a Soviet military tribunal in Riga, the capital of Latvia. There, the men who once ruled the Baltic territories will be confronted with the crimes committed under their command and forced to answer for them. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 with the German attack on Poland. On the 22nd of June 1941, Germany invaded its former partner, the Soviet Union, and within a few weeks, German forces had overrun the territories of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which the Soviet Union had occupied and annexed in 1940. The occupied land was placed under a German civil administration called the Reichskommissariat Ostland, meaning the Reich Commissariat for the East, which covered the Baltic states and the western part of today's Belarus. What happened there over the next 3 years was among the most concentrated killings of the entire war. Almost the whole of Latvia's Jewish population, around 70,000 people, was murdered during the Holocaust, and most of them died in the first months of the Nazi occupation. The Jews of Riga were driven into a ghetto which was sealed on the 25th of October 1941 with around 30,000 people inside. 5 weeks later, the greater part of it was emptied. On the 30th of November and the 8th of December 1941, around 25,000 Jews were marched about 10 kilometers or 6 miles southeast out of the city to Rumbula Forest and shot at the edge of pits that had been dug there in advance. It was the largest single massacre in Latvia and one of the biggest Holocaust atrocities until the creation of the death camps. Ghetto was left behind, and the empty houses were soon filled with Jews deported from Germany, Austria, and the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia to the Baltic to be killed. Many of them were shot in their turn in the Biķernieki Forest on the northeastern edge of Riga, where around 35,000 people died in the course of the Nazi occupation. Much of the killing in Latvia was carried out not by Germans, but by local collaborators. The most important of them was the Latvian paramilitary unit led by Viktors Arājs, a former police officer whose men shot Jews across the whole country and took also part in the killings at Rumbula. They worked throughout under the direction of the SS. The man who organized the killing at Rumbula was Friedrich Jeckeln. During the Second World War, he served as the supreme commander of all the SS and police forces, first in southern Russia and then in the Ostland, answering only to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and of the entire German police, and through him to Adolf Hitler. Jeckeln served as an officer in the German Imperial Army during the First World War, and afterwards worked as an engineer. He joined the Nazi Party in 1929 and was accepted into the SS in December 1930. He rose fast, and by the time of the invasion of the Soviet Union was one of the most trusted regional commanders of Himmler. His career left a trail of mass graves along the line of the German advance. In Ukraine, between the 26th and 28th of August 1941, his forces shot around 23,600 Jews at Kamianets-Podilskyi, a city in the west of the country. A month later, units under his command took part in the murder of 33,771 Jews at Babyn Yar, a ravine on the edge of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. In the autumn of 1941, Jeckeln was transferred to the Baltic, where he applied the same methods. Jeckeln devised a way of shooting large numbers of people that his own men called the Jeckeln system, or Sardinenpackung, meaning sardine packing. Victims were forced to lie face down in the pit on top of those already shot, before being killed with a gunshot. The German occupation forces in the Baltic killed in other ways as well. Tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war died of hunger, disease, and shooting. Villages suspected of helping partisans were burned down with the people still inside them. In the prisons of the occupied towns, inmates were beaten and given electric shocks. Civilians were deported to Germany for forced labor against their will, and entire regions were stripped of their food, livestock, and machinery. In Estonia, the occupation authorities ran a policy known as Germanization, which meant taxing the local non-German civilian population, jailing anyone judged unreliable, and seizing their property in order to clear space for German settlers. When the front turned and the Germans retreated, they destroyed what they could not take with them. The Red Army, the armed forces of the Soviet Union, reconquered the Baltic and took Riga on the 13th of October 1944. Some German commanders failed to escape to the west in time, and others were captured in the final collapse of Germany. Jeckeln was taken prisoner near Halbe, a small town south of Berlin, on the 28th of April 1945. The Soviet authorities had been recording the crimes of the occupation for years through the Extraordinary State Commission, which was created in Moscow in November 1942. It collected documents, opened mass graves, and took down the testimony of survivors and witnesses. By the end of the war, the Soviets had evidence and even some perpetrators in their hands, and they decided to judge them in a public process. The Riga Trial opened on the 26th of January 1946 before a military tribunal of the Baltic Military District, one of the Soviet Army's regional commands. There were 8 defendants, all charged under a decree the Soviet leadership had issued on the 19th of April 1943, which laid down how German war criminals and their local helpers were to be tried and punished. The defendants had directed the occupation at every level. Alongside Jeckeln stood Alexander Birking, who had been district commissioner in Estonia during the war and had sent 3,000 people to Germany for forced labor, and 6 generals of the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces. Siegfried Ruff had been military commandant of Riga in 1944, the year the Germans wrecked the city before they retreated from it. Albrecht Dijen von Monteton, who commanded at Libau, today Liepaja, on the Latvian coast, answered, among other crimes, for the deportation of more than 22,000 people from that area and for the burning of villages. Bronislav Pavel had run the prisoner of war camps of the Ostland, and those camps became sites of mass extermination. Friedrich Werther held field commands in the Baltic and other Soviet territories, and he was accused of issuing orders that led his men to shoot and burn alive hundreds of civilians. According to the indictment, soldiers under his command even put children into sacks and killed them by slamming them against trees. Hans Küpper answered for the killing of civilians suspected of supporting the partisan movement and for the destruction of entire regions during the retreat of German troops. Wolfgang von Dittfurt had commanded the 403rd Security Division in Lithuania and Belarus. The indictment charged him with the arrest and shooting of Soviet citizens near Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, in July and August 1941, an action in which around 4,000 Jews were murdered. It also charged him with operations against the civilian population around the Belarusian city of Vitebsk between September 1941 and March 1942, and with his conduct as war commandant of the Russian city of Kursk in the spring of 1942. Jeckeln, whom the court in Riga held responsible for the deaths of more than 100,000 Jews, Roma, and others, had been interrogated 29 times before he was brought into the courtroom. His own statements, together with captured German documents and testimony from survivors and men who had served under him, left no doubt about his guilt. He did not deny the killings. Instead, he claimed that he had acted on Himmler's orders and therefore did not bear personal responsibility. The court rejected this defense, and on the 3rd of February 1946, the tribunal delivered its verdict. All 8 defendants were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. However, the sentence on von Dittfurt was not carried out, reportedly because of his health, and he died of heart failure in a Riga prison hospital on the 22nd of March 1946. The other 7 were taken to the gallows that same afternoon. The condemned men were made to stand on the backs of lorries with nooses round their necks. The lorries then drove forward and left them hanging as at least 4,000 people watched them die. Among them were Red Army soldiers and residents of Riga who had lived through the occupation and lost their families to the killings these men had directed. Jeckeln had turned 51 the day before, and he died in the city whose Jews he had murdered in the pits at Rumbula. The Riga Trial, whose verdict was never in doubt, as was often the case in the Soviet justice system, was as much an instrument of Stalin's state as it was a court of justice. Even so, it achieved something few courts had done before. Men who had directed the murder of Jews and other civilians were confronted with evidence of their crimes and forced to answer for them where those crimes had been committed. The message of the Riga trial was clear. The killings followed a chain of command, and the men at its head could be identified and brought to justice.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.